Everybody, and welcome to Spiritualism New Zealand mini seminar. My name is Kim Chamberlain, and today we have with us Gail Payne. Gail is from Christchurch, and she's going to be talking about evidential mediumship. Now, unfortunately, we have a bit of a technical hiccup here, and Gail can't hear me, so I'm going to say the questions, and hopefully, Gail will be able to say the answers. So, first question. We are talking about evidential mediumship. Can you define evidential mediumship for us?
Okay, evidential mediumship. Well, I guess the meaning's in the word, in that it's proving with evidence or proof the continuation of the soul beyond bodily death. That's the main reason for using evidential mediumship, and it does that through giving very specific evidence about the person that the medium is communicating with in the spirit world. So that may be a family member, a friend, a neighbor, an old workmate, or whatever. But the evidence, we talk about hard and soft evidence. So soft evidence is more personality characteristics. And while they're really useful, they need to be quite specific because they can be quite general. Like a lot of people bake scones and wore aprons. So that's not really strong evidence, if you know what I mean. And harder or stronger evidence tends to be names, places that people lived, the kind of work they did, the sort of car they drove, and particular events or incidences that took place in their life, perhaps their relationship with you as well. It's coming through the mind of the medium, so it's also known as mental mediumship. Which means that the medium is aware and conscious of what's happening, and is getting messages from the spirit world through the mind in the form of pictures, knowledge, knowings, sensing, etc. And that's where the seven clairs come in, which many people will be familiar with: clairvoyance, clairaudience, claircognizance, inner knowing, etc. So I guess for me, the reason that I find it so important it has been throughout the history of modern spiritualism, but particularly today, is that it's very easy for me to come to you and say, I have your guides with me. I see this in your aura. I see these colors. I have these power animals and your angels are with you, and to describe those to you very accurately, I'm sure, and many people do describe that very accurately. But how can I prove that? And that's where evidential mediumship comes in, because it gives that proof of somebody who has been on this side of the veil, and some very specific characteristics and information is being given. Now, I have had people say to me, "Oh, Gail, just skip all that stuff. It's boring. We don't need to know and we don't care. We already believe." But I think it is really important because it keeps me professional. But it also means that that person, that I'm not letting my own opinions and that come into the reading, that I'm checking back with that person. I know who I've got with me, and the person has given me permission to bring them in and to carry on with the reading. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in terms of psychic, like we're all psychic. But psychic tends to work more on the energy of the person. Now, with psychic mediumship, people are certainly working with their guides in there, absolutely, and we all do it, and we're all psychic. But it's not a communication with the deceased person and giving the evidence of that.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Right. So, second question. What is modern spiritualism?
Okay, so modern spiritualism, I guess the definition of it as we know it today, was sort of around the mid-1700s. There was a Swedish theologian, and then in the mid-1800s there were the Fox sisters, which many people are familiar with in New York, with the wrappings in their house, in their house, and a lot of the information that came through. And that's often what people think is like the birth of modern spiritualism as such. I do really suggest that people research more on the Spiritualism New Zealand website, because there's lots of fantastic information there about spiritualism, and there is a timeline of modern spiritualism and also of its history in New Zealand. So why, and I guess the other thing to say about it is that it has three components. So yes, it's a religion, but it's also a science and a philosophy, and that's really important. It's a religion, a science, and a philosophy. Why did it arise around that time? Well, in the Victorian era, there was a great deal of interest in science, and Darwin's theory, etc., was coming to the fore. And people were starting to question what you might call blind faith. Women's roles were changing. And so women were often mediums then and still are. And women were leading many of the churches and many of the movements and seances and demonstrations of mediumship. So it was a time where it fitted into history very, very, very well. And people were ready for something that had that scientific component, but also that philosophical component. They didn't only want to be told what to do by the person who led a particular organization. They wanted to think for themselves and debate and understand and learn a lot more. And of course, alongside that were the psychic research associations that were set up in England in the 1880s, and a few years later in America. They conducted the most amazing scientific research around the authenticity of evidential mediumship and trance work. And they're still active today. Spiritualism New Zealand, of course. I think it started in New Zealand in the 1860s in Otago. And the Spiritualist National Union in Great Britain, adhering to the 7 principles of spiritualism, is channeled by Emma Harging Britton. So that's all sort of forming modern spiritualism. But is mediumship, did it start then? No, of course not. Mediumship is very ancient. It's been with us throughout time. You've got tohunga and Māori, you've got shamans, lots of indigenous cultures who liaise with other sides of life. You've got saints, you've got mystics, you've got people who had visions that are well documented. You've got small villages where people went along for information. So it's not new, but in this form, science, religion, philosophy, the 7 principles, and evidential mediumship, and a much greater understanding of the soul. A lot was written and developed around the soul, what happens, what's going on the other side of life, around energy, etc. So that really formed modern spiritualism as we know it today. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. So, third question. What are some of the challenges with adapting to the new growth of ideas and spiritual knowledge while still honouring old ways and principles?
Okay. Look, the world's moving fast. You know, we know a lot more than we used to know. We've got quantum physics. We've got lots more understandings about energy and the use of energy and the constant movement of frequency, and things that we didn't have access to before, like we can Google, and that's fantastic. And there's an urgency that I feel in the world. I think people want to move very quickly with this. They want everything to go very fast. So I notice that there's a lot of weekend courses. And suddenly at the end of the weekend, the person is trained in that particular modality. And that worries me a little bit if they're then working with people. I'm not saying that there's lots of great things happening out there. But for evidential mediumship, most mediums sit for years, many years in a development circle. They have to do their own personal growth alongside their spiritual growth. That's a lifelong journey. And I think that kind of grounding, that there's a real place for that in today's world. It's important, and all the ethics and boundaries that go alongside that.
Yeah. Okay, so the fourth question is, looking at those ethics and boundaries and values, what would you say about that in relation to evidential mediumship?
Okay, so in terms of the ethics and boundaries and values, like obviously people often seek out the services of a medium at quite a vulnerable time in life, and often a very tragic or sad time in life. So ethics and boundaries are very, very important. Sensitivity and kindness and personal growth is required for the medium. They need to be inclusive in their own belief systems and values. They can't hold prejudice and certain ideas, that's judgmental about how people live. And they need to also understand, as part of their own journey, some of the natural laws in life, and some of the principles, such as the principle of free will, that people all have to grow. We've all got to do our soul growth and make our own decisions, our own mistakes, if that's the right word. That's really important, because without that, how do we grow? How do we learn? So mediums can't be there to tell people what to do, to make predictions and say you must do this, because that would be going against some of those natural laws. And then, of course, there's all the normal things like financial transparency is important. Not creating dependency. Like, to me, people shouldn't be going to mediums all the time. They need to be using that light and that information to pursue their own spiritual journey. It's about empowerment. I mean, it is about support as well, obviously, with grief, but it's also about empowerment for the person. Confidentiality, no medical advice, no legal advice, etc. But I think, for me, most of all, it's about being very humble, and there's a journey in there, and that humility or lack of ego, that has to come from both sides to both sides of the veil. So I think mediums need to be humble with the human people they're talking with, but also with spirit.
Thank you. Okay, so the fifth question and final question. If you had to sum up the role of evidential mediumship in today's world, what would you say?
Okay, well, I would say, how lucky are we? How lucky are we to not only know and understand that life is eternal, that the soul carries on beyond bodily death, but to really have imbibed that at a heart level, and to really have an awareness and an experience of what that means in life, because that changes everything. Yes, of course, we still grieve as humans when we lose our loved ones, absolutely, and we should too. That's the human journey. But that deep understanding of the eternal nature of life, and the eternal nature of soul growth, to me, that changes everything. That is a connection at a larger level with all other souls, with the divine, with the great spirit, if you like. And if you feel that connection, why would you want to hurt another person? Because suddenly you realize that everything that happens to other people in the world is also happening to us on some level, that there is that greater connection of love or energy, if you like. So to me, evidential mediumship has a role to play in that, because it provides that proof. So therefore, it's important for the future.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. We managed it. So thank you very much for that, Gail. It was absolutely fascinating, and there was lots I would like to ask, but we always have a very short time in the mini seminars. And so what I will do is I'll put below a way to contact Gail if you would like to ask her any more questions. And just thank you so much for your time and for explaining it so well. Thank you.